Today's speaker, Valerie Lewis, is our speaker. She is a retired teacher who taught in a girls' school in the 1960s in West Africa. Then she and a friend traveled across the continent to East Africa, crossing dry savannas and deserts in Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Sudan, and Egypt. She lived and taught in Argentina for 2 years and then traveled across Russia on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. She met her future husband, Michael, in England. For him, it was love at first sight, and he ultimately proposed to her. She accepted, stating, "I've had a very exciting life, so I guess I'm ready for boredom." I didn't make this up. He told me about it. Anyway, please welcome Valerie Lewis.
So I would also say how wonderful it is how many of you have come out today after putting on many, many layers. So I appreciate you being here, and it's good to see you. I am going to, as has been explained, tell you about the trip I did all the way from Accra in Ghana, in West Africa, to Cairo in the northeast of Africa. And I'm going to show some photographs, some of which were taken with my very little brownie camera while I was traveling. So I ask for your indulgence regarding the quality of those photographs. So I taught in a girls' secondary school in Ghana, in West Africa, from 1965 to 1966. St. Monica's was run by an order of Anglican nuns from Britain who offered a high-quality education to the 150 girls who were boarders on the campus. They boarded because many of them came from villages with no electricity to enable them to study, and because there was no bus service to take them to and from school. Here's a little group of the girls who are coming to my house with work for me. I had to grade the work that I'd assigned them, and they're head delivering it to me. I was in Ghana with Voluntary Service Overseas, or VSO, the British equivalent of the Peace Corps. While there are many local languages spoken in Ghana, English is the official language. I taught geography and some English literature. When the school year was coming to an end, another volunteer, Penny, a friend of mine, told me that she would like to travel to Cairo because she had lived there as a child and wanted to find her family home. So we agreed to try and get there together. So here's a map showing our projected route in more detail than you just saw. Wait a minute. So here, wait a minute, where am I? Here's Ghana here, and two little countries here, then Nigeria, which is the most populous country in Africa. And we went up to Lake Chad at one point, and then across the country of Chad and into Sudan. And I will show you the second part of the trip with another map a little later. This we reckoned was going to be 3,600 miles in total. For this journey, we had no tickets, a ridiculously small amount of money, and were planning to hitchhike or travel. Oh, sorry, I left a couple of maps out. I should have explained that Ghana Wait a minute, I'm getting used to this. Ghana is on the coast here in equatorial Africa. The equator is just below the edge of the map. So this is hot, steamy, tropical forest. And then as we go north, it gets drier and drier and drier until it's pretty well all sand here. And it certainly is in Sudan and Egypt. Here's another kind of map that might help you, showing some countries of Nigeria, Chad, Sudan, and Egypt. So we have no tickets, very little money, and we're planning to hitchhike or use these, which are called mammy lorries. Mammy lorries are remodeled trucks with benches inside and a roof put on the top. They ran when the driver decided it was sufficiently full. There was an art to getting into them without hitting your head and getting your feet all tangled up. For our trip, for beds, we would use hostels available to VSOs and Peace Corps volunteers. In addition, there were rest houses built in colonial times for administrators traveling on government business, and usually available to other travelers as well. Further along, I'll describe other modes of accommodation a little more unusual. In effect, we were counting on the kindness of strangers, and that we found in abundance. And so, on the July 21st, we set out and crossed through Togo, Dahomey, and into Nigeria here, with our first stop being Lagos, a huge, bustling city of millions. And one of the largest cities in Africa. We found the shops, women's clothes, buildings, and a hotel where we went to cash travelers' checks, all more stylish and sophisticated than our dear provincial Ghana. There's one of the many markets in Lagos. Next morning, while hitchhiking further north, we were picked up in a chauffeur-driven chief's car. In Abeokuta, down the road, the chief asked his chauffeur to show us the town. So we were able to see where the renowned blue and white dyed fabrics, blue and white dyed fabrics, which Abeokuta is famous for, were manufactured. On one occasion, farther north, we hitchhiked to the small town of Oyo and stopped to look at the fine work of several calabash carvers on the side of the road. Calabashes are made from gourds. But when we stationed ourselves further down the road in order to hitchhike, scarcely anyone drove by. After 3 hours in the afternoon burning sun, we retreated to the town, having learned a lesson about the hours for hitchhiking. We made our way to the secondary school, found some VSOs, and were offered a bed for the night. And so to Jebba, where the road crossed the huge river Niger. The bridge consisted of a single track road for the main road in this huge country going north, which went out to an island in the middle of the river and then continued to the other side. We got to the island and then were confronted by a large herd of zebu cattle with their great big horns and enormous humps, which were coming the other way. We had no choice but to sit and wait for them to amble past. Our driver said he had once done this on the bridge and had to wait 3 hours for the cattle to cross. Kaduna was the capital of Nigeria at the time, but has been superseded by a new capital called Abuja. Kaduna, like Washington, D.C., was created for government offices and ambassadors' residences. It had a European appearance. It also had some wandering musicians that we listened to for a while. But while there, we heard talk of a coup in the south. The post office had not received any international mail or domestic mail that day. Thus, the next day, we were a little nervous about moving on, but a kindly Peace Corps couple offered to drive us to Jos, where we were trying to go. So outside Kaduna, there was a roadblock manned by heavily armed soldiers who told us to get out of the car while they poked at our luggage and asked Penny if she had anything dangerous in her rucksack. On the way further north to Jos, we passed attractive little huts like this with wonderful thatched roofs. And the appeal of Jos is that it's high above the hot, bare plains and is much cooler. We were fortunate to stay in a hut like this for students on vacation who were on vacation, but usually were studying at the archaeology college there. Jos was also the headquarters of the Sudan Interior Mission, an enormous evangelical organization with numerous buildings, hundreds of personnel, an immense bookstore, and its own fleet of planes, which were all grounded during the coup. Part of the mission's work was to prevent the spread of Islam farther south, yet in Jos, as in many places in Ghana and in many places in Nigeria, there were scores of Hausa traders like this man who are known for their craftsmanship in leather and are Muslims. On the road again toward Kano, we were picked up by a pleasant Nigerian couple. We rode along at great speed in spite of some rain having made the road surface very slippery. Suddenly we skidded, went into a ditch, and ended upside down with gas pouring out of the tank. Penny and I managed to wriggle out of the passenger window and were quite unhurt, but very shaken. Although the car was righted by some men from a passing truck, we opted not to continue with our speed-crazed driver. Soon, a large station wagon came by with two men who were going to Kano. I had wanted to go there since I saw a picture of it in my grade school geography book. The entire town is built of mud. It is surrounded by mud walls and has the impressive gates like this to get into the city. Even the emir's palace, which you can see on the right, the entrance to the palace, is made of mud, and you can see the wall that surrounds the compound of his palace. Palace guards in red and green robes and very large turbans also carried impressive curved swords. There was also some Tuareg men who had come in from the desert who wear black robes and turbans, and their faces are covered except for their eyes to protect them from the blowing sand. The dusty streets were filled with cars, trucks, and bicycles, all dodging donkeys, sheep, goats, dogs, and turkeys. We saw the famous pyramids made entirely of sacks of peanuts that are waiting for export, as you can see here, thousands of sacks. When the muezzin called everyone for prayer from the minaret, we knew we were in the Muslim north. While in Kano, we learned that in the coup in the south that we had heard about, the president had been assassinated. This was the third coup while I had been in West Africa. Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, had been removed 6 months after I arrived in that country. And when I traveled in the spring break to Upper Volta, now called Burkina Faso, to the north of Ghana, there was a coup there while we were in the capital of Ouagadougou. Maiduguri, in the far northeast of Nigeria, is a trading center serving people from the countries of, from the north, Niger, or Niger, whichever you want to call it, Chad in the east, and Cameroon to the south. Nomadic Shua women came riding into the market on oxen. Local Kanuri women in the market who wore large wooden earplugs displayed their beautiful hairstyles as they sat selling their wares. Many camels and horses were also around. Plenty of the goods for sale were made of leather, especially saddles and bridles, because that area is cattle country. So at night, we ate delicious steaks for dinner. Now, we're going to go on from Maiduguri up here, up to Lake Chad here. So we traveled in a Land Rover through mud and sand like this and got stuck like this frequently. And in this case, we needed a tractor to be brought out to get us out. But we got to Lake Chad, and here is a typical canoe on the lake. We thought we had reached the end of the world. It seemed so remote. Monkeys chattered in the trees, while large birds such as storks, bustards, and cranes walked close by. We went with scientists working on irrigation schemes and the development of a fishing industry. One of the largest freshwater lakes in Africa, Lake Chad supported fish, wildlife, and agriculture. 17 million people depended on it. However, today it has shrunk by 90%, due mainly to climate change. And this upheaval in people's lives has enabled terrorist groups like Boko Haram to establish themselves there. So now we're on the River Shari, which separates Nigeria from Cameroon and can produce perch like that. We persuaded the owner of a canoe, very similar to the one you can see in the photo, to take us for a short ride up and down the banks of the river, while two curious hippopotamuses kept popping up from the water to inspect us. After pinching ourselves that we were in a dugout canoe on a river in Central Africa with hippos watching us, the young boy who was acting as our interpreter asked, "Do you know the Beatles?" So then on to the country of Chad. The capital was called Fort Lamy, and now N'Djamena. And here was the market where they were selling peanuts. And this lady also, who was concerned about her baby, had things for sale too. We stayed at the Sudan United Mission Rest House. We tried to find a ride across Chad, first with missionaries, then with business people, and even the French army, which had 2,000 troops stationed there. However, we were told by everyone it was the rainy season, the roads were closed, and no one was traveling. So very reluctantly, we bought tickets to fly to the nearest town in Sudan. So here we have second part of the trip, and here's Chad, and we landed here in El Janina. We traveled here and then made our way to Khartoum, followed the Nile all the way north, and then ended up in Cairo. So we arrived in El Janina, the little airport where it was intensely hot and a loud crowd of men were shouting, pushing, and waving their arms. Some were trying to take parcels from Fort Lamy off the plane. Others were fighting to put goods for Khartoum on the plane. And yet others were arguing about what to do with two white women who actually wanted to stay in Janina. It was decided that we would stay with the air traffic control officer of the airport named Babakir, who appears here on the right, and whose house was at the other end of the airfield. Very soon, two beds were on the way down the runway on the fire truck. We were given some tea then, a tasty lunch, which was the beginning of the extraordinary hospitality we received throughout our stay in Sudan. That evening, we had drinks, mostly whiskey, with the district commissioner, the commanding officer of the local army detachment, our host, Babakir here, and his meteorological officer, Haribo, on the left, with Penny obviously in the middle. And the drinks were all in our bedroom because that was where the refrigerator was with the drinks themselves and ice. Later, we ate a delicious dinner prepared by the commanding officer's wife, but we never saw her and ate only with men. Next morning, we walked by the river, the barracks, the fort, and the market, where we watched great leather saddlebags being unloaded from camels coming into town. In a wadi, a dry riverbed, we watched some women collecting their household water by digging a hole in the sand and then waiting for water to trickle out into their buckets, just like kids do here on the beach. I've never forgotten that scene, especially when I see somebody letting the water run in the kitchen sink. The army, here shown, was sending some soldiers to Al-Fasher, another base about 200 miles to the east. And here you see our squad of soldiers, and you can see the huge Mercedes trucks in which we traveled on a path of sand, rocks, and occasional deep mud. That was all you could see. We lumbered over the rocks, ground through the mud, and had sand flying in the windows constantly. The soldiers purchased our lunch of hard-boiled eggs from a woman on a camel, where there was also a man selling Sudan-style tea, which requires at least 4 teaspoons of sugar in the tea, made with very hot water. We were watched by a naked man sitting on a bull holding a very long spear. That night, the kindly soldiers made a shelter by attaching a tarp to the trucks and setting up simple wooden bed frames strung with animal hides, which must have been in the back of the trucks. We lay looking up at brilliant stars and the moon while camel caravans padded by in the cool of the night. I don't have a picture of a night caravan, so here's one in the day, just to give you an idea. The following morning, a sheep was slaughtered and put in a pot to cook. Local hospitality rules required that we be offered choice pieces of raw lung, raw liver, and raw stomach. Penny was unable to deal with them, but I made a desperate effort. I particularly do not recommend raw lung. It was like eating rubber. However, the lamb stew was tasty, fortifying us for 12 hours of jolting over even more rocks and bigger rocks than before. We passed near the 9,000-foot high Jebel Mara mountains, where we saw monkeys, a bustard, and a gazelle. Eventually, at dusk, exhausted, we stopped in a village where the soldiers gave us the cabin of one of the trucks for the night. We were woken by roosters and Muslim calls to prayer in the morning. By 9:30, we were in Al-Fasher, where we were greeted by the colonel and informed that now we were guests of the army. Major Majub, who was to be our escort, took us to the rest house where we couldn't wait to wash off layers and layers of dust, sweat, and sand. Lunch was at the major's house, where his wife had prepared a spectacular meal. We sat down with the colonel and 3 more majors, and when the meal was over, we went round to the back of the house to meet our host's wife and her mother, as well as Major Majub's mother and their children. And here's charming Major Majub, who insisted on having this formal photograph taken in a studio. During the next day, we toured the city with our major, visiting the boys' high school and middle school, in addition to the major's polo ponies and the large former palace of Sultan Ali Dinar, who supposedly had a very large harem and whose sword is displayed in the British Museum in London. At night, we drank copiously, this time mainly arak, which is made from anise, and ate with the army officers and the principals of the schools. Niala, 120 miles south of El Fasher, was our next destination because it lies at the railhead of trains bound for Khartoum. After yet another 12 hours of the even worse rocks and bumps in our trusty Mercedes trucks, we arrived late at night at the home of Major Fabian and his wife. They were Christians, so this is why we could be with her. In fact, we three women went the following evening to see the movie Hercules at the outdoor cinema in the back of a pickup truck. Then we were on the train going towards Khartoum. We spent 4 days on this train. We traveled at 25 miles an hour because the line was built on sand, so any heavy rain made the line very unstable. The country was flat and green and supported large herds of cattle, some as big as 5,000 head. We were in a women-only compartment with a young woman we couldn't communicate with, however hard we tried to use our very limited Arabic. But she had beautiful henna-painted hands like this girl here. We frequently stopped to let men pray beside the train. And at one of those stops, I walked round to the back of the train and discovered we were also transporting some camels and chickens. At one of the small stations, I managed to buy some peanuts, corn, eggs, and bread. We were excited when the train rumbled across a bridge over the Nile and into Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. Generous hospitality from the extended family of one of our army friends made it possible to stay for several days. We have visited the attractive park where the Blue Nile from Ethiopia and the White Nile from Tanzania come together, and you can see the differences in the colors of the water here. We saw the huge main mosque and toured the ethnographic museum. We went to the zoo, the university, and we saw the palace where the British governor, General Gordon, was assassinated in 1885. Now we were on the home stretch because when we left Khartoum by train, we were heading towards Cairo. The train crossed the Nubian desert where there was nothing whatsoever to see but sand and a telephone line disappearing into the hazy distance. At Wadi Halfa, on the border with Egypt, we boarded a boat and rowed down the newly created Lake Nasser to Aswan. There, the massive Aswan Dam had just been completed by the Soviets. And a short train ride further took us to the awe-inspiring sites of Luxor, great temples, almost 4,000 years old, with huge statues and pillars covered in hieroglyphs and standing in the blazing sun. Hidden deep in the rocky desert, to protect them, from grave robbers were the tombs of kings and queens, including that of Tutankhamun. These tombs were decorated in still vivid colors with elegant images of animal gods such as cats, crocodiles, hyenas, and ibis birds. Yet the splendors of the pharaohs brought tourists, accompanied by higher prices for our food, beds in hostels and hotels, and travel. Our funds were dwindling, so soon we were heading to Cairo by train, where we marveled at the beautiful objects from Tutankhamun's tomb, now in the Cairo Museum. Of course, we had to see the amazing pyramids, and we had to climb inside Cheops, the largest, and we had to be beside the Sphinx. We met our good friend Major Marju, who was on vacation with his wife in Cairo, and dinner with them seemed a fitting way to end this journey. It was October the 7th. We had been traveling for 2.5 months. Penny flew back to Ghana for another school year, and I headed for Britain and my family. Thank you.
Wow.
I'm happy to take questions if anybody's curious.
That was amazing. This is Zoom, and we're going to take questions first from our auditorium, and we'll do that first. But we had over 60 people on Zoom, but I just want to say that was definitely an amazing talk that you gave, and I know that all of us appreciated it. Go ahead, auditorium. You go with your Q&A first.
Okay, this is Bob. It seemed that everywhere you landed, you connected with people who were in the hierarchy of wherever you were. Did you have credentials that preceded you? How did this happen?
White skin.
Ah.
Rereading my diary, I realized that was making a huge difference to how we traveled.
So
just the fact that we were white and women.
So that's where the term white privilege came from.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Would it have been the same if you were male?
I think so. Yes, I think so.
First, thank you. It was absolutely fascinating. Weren't you afraid?
I've been asked that.
Or was it
before.
because you were so young? You know, it just amazes me. Thank you.
No, we weren't afraid. I don't think it even entered our heads. I mean, we didn't do foolish things like walk on very dark streets alone in the middle of the night or something like that. But apart from that, and I think we were safe. We really were safe. There's a lady there.
Did you always have host people cooking for you, or did you cook for yourselves? And did any of the food make you sick?
When we stayed in somebody's house, then no, I was going to say they cooked, but that's not true. We often went out. Food was very inexpensive there. And we would go out. In Ghana, it's called chop, the food. So we would go out to get some chop in very sort of cheap places. Even with the VSOs we were staying with or anybody else we were with. Sometimes people, then of course I described in Sudan how they cooked amazing meals for us. The women did, and we never even met the people who had produced the meals. And we bought odds and ends on the road as we traveled along. I'd mentioned the ubiquitous peanuts, and hard-boiled eggs, very popular everywhere. So somehow we survived. No, amazingly, we did not get sick. We were very careful. And of course, water's the problem. And we had lots of iodine pills and were very careful about our water. Although I have to say, when we got to Wadi Halfa, which I just mentioned briefly, the Aswan Dam had been completed, and was all the water in the river was backing up, creating an enormous lake. So Wadi Halfa, which had been a large thriving town, was going underwater. So we had to take a boat to go down what was essentially now the lake rather than the river. And it was so hot and we were so desperate to drink. Without thinking, I went to a large clay pot that they had on the deck of the ship, and you could get water out of it. So I just got some water. And I was so relieved because we were so desperate. About 5 minutes later, I saw somebody filling the pot. They just threw a bucket over the side into the water and put it into the pot. For the next 24 hours, I sweated. I was sure that I was going to get really sick. Nothing happened. I was very lucky. And that was very stupid that I did that.
I have a question for you. Have you ever kept in touch or heard from the students that you taught in the 60s in Ghana? I know it's a while, but I just wondered if you heard from any of these.
I tried for a while, but I sort of couldn't keep up. And I did keep in touch. I was assigned, as were other volunteers like myself, little bungalows. And I lived in the bungalow, but I had a young boy, Kofi, who was my houseboy, because I had no running water in the bungalow. And he brought water from a spigot outside on his head on a bucket and brought me water. He also went to the market to get food for me there, because if I went, the price went way up. So he did all my shopping for me, and then I cooked inside. And I kept in touch with him for quite a long time. And then he grew up and got married, and I sort of lost touch. But the girls, I didn't know. There were a lot of them, and it was really hard. So I have to admit, I really didn't do much in the way of keeping up with them.
So first of all, thank you. That was an amazing trip and very interesting to listen to. My question is, when you were in the Muslim areas, we know that in the Muslim culture, there's the separation of men and women, which you illustrated. Can you explain why, as a woman, you were still permitted to be with the men?
I think for the same reason that I just said. I think it was because we were white foreign women. So we didn't come under any of the sort of local rules. So they just accepted us. They were so generous and hospitable, and they just accepted us. And we were an exception to the rule. That was it. I think that's how it worked.
It was very good. If you tried to repeat this trip today, would there be big differences?
I think so.
What would they be?
Oh, that's a good question.
You've got the issues in Sudan with the separation and the revolution.
Right. Sudan would be very different. You're absolutely right, because the southern part of Sudan has seceded. Yes, and is now South Sudan. The cities all would be even bigger, and the buildings would all be bigger in the cities than they were. Michael and I went back to Ghana about 18 years ago, something like that, to see our friend Jeff Tabin doing cataract surgery. And this is Ghana, and the city was bigger, and there were more buildings, obviously, and more people. The roads were as bad as they ever were 40 years before, or whatever it was. And I was horrified to find when we went out in the bush into the country that there was still many, many villages with no running water. And one of the things that I did on another trip to Ghana was to go with a group that were trying to put water into villages, clean water that you could get from a pump. And when we went one time to see where the water came from, it came from a puddle down under some bushes. And what was living in it, I didn't even want to think. But that was the main water supply before they got the pump and the well.
I think we can take questions from Zoom, from your audience.
Thank you, Arnie. We will do that. First of all, we've had over 60 people on Zoom, and they all hung in there. We're very fascinated with your presentation. Many of us were concerned about the safety issues and wondered how you were able to handle that, but you already addressed that. One question we have is, how much did cultures change from one nation to the other? Or did you feel comfortable in just being friendly and open with other people, and that the culture changes didn't matter to you?
Yeah, I don't think the changes mattered. There were changes, clearly. And Ghana is very different from Nigeria, which was different from Chad, and certainly different from Sudan and Egypt. But I think one of the things you find on a journey like this, that on bottom line, everybody's the same, or everybody's kind and hospitable and friendly. And that's what they were with us. No, I can't remember when it was difficult to deal with somebody. The only times it was difficult was when we crossed borders. And then you had a lot of officious people who thought they knew what they were doing and created a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy for you. Apart from that, I really don't remember difficulties at all. And people stopped to give us rides when we were hitchhiking. Couldn't have been kinder. So.
Thank you. We have many people just thanking you for the wonderful presentation. David Waterman is asking this question. Were you aware of any beginnings of the Biafran War in Nigeria that started in July of 1967?
No, that funnily enough, we weren't. I shouldn't say funnily enough, but no, we weren't aware of that. That started so soon after we were there. Not that we stayed there very long in that particular area. So the answer is no, I wasn't aware of that brewing at the time.
Barry Waldman may be your cousin. At least Barry is saying, as a former hitchhiker, I'm most amazed at how fully you documented your fascinating trip, both in words and photos. Thanks, cousin.
Yes, I was very particular about writing in a diary every night, even however tired. It's very important. I've done other trips like this too, in South America, for example, and I forced myself to write in a diary every night, even if my head wasn't even upright. So it's so important.
Yes, we have a couple more. Karen Jacobson asks, you mentioned Muslim and Christianity. Did the native people have other religions of their own?
Yes, there's a lot in Ghana. I can't speak so much for the other countries since I didn't spend so much time there. But in Ghana, there are a lot of animists worshipping animals and so on. And a lot of fetishism, where certain statues are revered and kept in a special little hut or something. And there are ceremonies where blood is poured on them and so on. I couldn't say whether those people also practice Christianity. I assume not. It doesn't really quite go together. But in the south of Ghana and in the south of Nigeria, Christianity is very clearly evident, apart from lots of churches. There are what I should have more photographs. There are wonderful quotations from the Bible or even sort of Christian sayings that have been made up on the front of hairdressers' shops, cafes, furniture stores, or on the buses and those mammy lorries. They often have quotations from the Bible. And Michael and I have been to church services in Ghana where the place is absolutely rocking. The floor is absolutely bouncing with people being so enthusiastic about their religion and the singing.
We have someone was asking, David is asking, will we see an upcoming presentation of your Trans-Siberian Express trip?
Oh.
And when are you going to give a talk about your travels in South America? Well, we have dibs on those if you want to come back to give us those presentations. Bob Dauber will certainly approach you on that. But how do you feel about when are you going to be giving talks on Trans-Siberian and South America?
Okay, well,
Do you have those?
it's you speaking. I can't always
Yeah,
figure out.
do you have those prepared?
I have diaries.
Do you have
I got all this material from my diary.
Well, I mean, we won't hold you up here, but we just want you to know there's a great interest in what you did. You did it wonderfully, and we would love to have you back. There's another question, though. Who inspires you? How are you inspired to give your talks? Dave Morton Lane is asking, were you inspired by anyone to do this?
Well, my husband has been here to give you talks. So he inspired me, but at the same time thought, well, if he can give a talk, maybe I could give a talk too. So
we have a question from, I think someone wants to speak from Peter from United Kingdom.
My goodness.
If Peter will unmute himself. Go ahead,
Hi,
Peter.
Valerie, Peter Phillips from Shropshire. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can, Peter.
Right.
Go ahead.
Well, thank you, Ron. My question, Valerie, is that you mentioned that you were making the trip because your friend Penny wanted to revisit Cairo and find the place, I think, where she stayed there. Did you find it?
She went off on her own and went around, and she did find the house. And she had wanted also, her family had lost, she lost a baby sister when they lived in Cairo. So she wanted to go to the cemetery too and see if she could find the grave. So as I remember, she was successful on both counts.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wonderful. Great. Isn't that lovely? And thank you, Valerie, very much. It comes over very well in England, I tell you.
It's lovely to see you.
Peter, it's 10 degrees in Northbrook, Illinois. What's your temperature?
It has been quite cold, but we're almost in double digits, about 9 degrees, 10. So it's wet and horrible as usual this time of the year.
I'm talking Fahrenheit and you're talking something else.
Thanks,
Right.
Valerie, very much. Lovely, lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm turning it back to the auditorium.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Valerie, it was just fantastic.
Thank you.
Michael knows how to get hold of me. So when you got another one ready, we
All
would
right.
welcome you. This was just fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.